Thanks, Simon. I did ride a hydrogen motorbike once, and it was fantastic. I guess we've got two elements here, and we've got the kind of the micro driving people's behaviour, and the macro, the sort of big energy questions. So we'll start with the former. And by the way, get your questions in on oh, we've got some stuff in already, so I'll have a look at those in a second. Thank you very much for that. But Stephanie, I'll kick off with you. Your job is all about basically allocating money to drive, consumers, to encourage consumers to buy electric cars. Not, relatively not that many are buying them at the moment. How do you know what to spend your money on? How do you know where to incentivize and what's going to work?
But I suppose people often say to us, this is a real chicken and egg problem. So do you have the vehicles first, or do you have the infrastructure first? And which do you prioritize? And I think from our perspective, none of this transition happens unless you have all of the infrastructure and the incentives around vehicles and kind of other local incentives. It's a kind of whole of system approach, a kind of ecosystem approach that will really drive this. So if you look at other markets like Norway, for instance, where they have about 50% penetration of plug-in vehicles at the moment, they've been really successful at making sure that ecosystem works. So in the UK, what we're doing and what we've been doing since about 2010, 2011 is actually providing, one of the most comprehensive and generous incentive packages in the world. So we know that right from our plug-in car grants to our R&D offer, where we spend kind of multi-million-pound R&D programs each year, right through, as I kind of talked through the presentation, to our infrastructure offer. So I suppose the short answer is you have to do everything if you're going to do anything, I think.
The government did come in for some stick recently about the plug-in car grant, about pulling that. You mentioned Norway. I was there fairly recently testing the new electric black cab that's now out in London, being rolled out. And there are electric cars everywhere, and I know exactly why. They can use the bus lanes, they get a massive tax break. There are charging points everywhere. We're in the Arctic Circle. There are charging points all over the place. You can plug in where you like. It's just it's made really easy. I mean, how do you respond? They've thrown money at it, and with the plug-in grant, we've taken some away. So how do you respond to that?
So the plug-in car grant has been in place since 2011, so actually much earlier than a number of other major economies, and we've supported the purchase of over 170,000 plug-in vehicles now. As a government, we need to we regularly review the level of grant that we're offering to make sure that we're getting value for money for the taxpayer. So we looked at the market, saw where prices were going, saw that battery prices have actually come down about 80% since 2010, looked at some of the vehicle manufacturer production plans and the prices that they tell us and publicly announce they're going to bring models at, and that's how we make our assessment of what we think an effective but value for money grant level is. So yeah, we made the changes recently, and we've said we'll have in place a plug-in car grant until at least 2020 because we recognise the role of it, particularly for what we call Category 1 vehicles, so battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and some range extender vehicles with long enough range.
Now, David, you've talked about this research you're doing. How does it work in practical terms? Are you giving people an electric car to use, or is it their own electric car? And how's it working in practical terms, and what do you hope to get from it in the end?
Well, understanding the behaviour of electric car users as is a problem, because not that many of them. So the trial that we ran took a very large number, 400 odd of people, and basically gave them some cars to try. A regular car, the same car but a plug-in electric hybrid, and then the same car but an EV. And what we looked at is their feelings before they tried any of those and their feelings afterwards. We also looked at their charging behaviour and how they used the cars. So, for example, after using an EV, does a range-anxious person get the hang of it, start to increase their usage, get greater distances from home? Things like that.
Ross, we were talking about buying electric cars. You don't drive an electric car, do you? Why do you think we have an understanding of what's going to drive people's behaviour to buy them in the end? I mean, I know why I haven't got one, and it seems fairly obvious to me. But do you think we're really getting across now, where to spend the money to encourage people to buy?
I think we probably do understand it, and I think I think probably the vehicle manufacturers and producers understand it as well, but I think there's a dilemma there for cost. Coming back to that report that we were involved in, it's cost enough on the road and production. I mean, we've said for quite some time, and we might be wrong on this, but I think the key to electric vehicles is to get them into fleets, and fleets running them regularly, because the fleets then produce the second-hand cars. Those second-hand cars get bought up. People who are part of those fleets and work for those companies are driving electric vehicles, are getting comfortable that they actually work, that the charging is there. At the moment, we still very much suffer from the charging concerns, and I couldn't agree more. I think you were saying that there's going to be pockets of people, and it tends to be, I'm afraid, the affluent people, and it tends to be, as you said, the innovators, and probably the very environmentally conscious people who have got the money to be able to invest in an electric vehicle that are driving this. So the cost is going to be a big issue going forward.
It's interesting you mentioned fleet there. I mean, not that my brother is representative of the entire country, but he's just bought a diesel car. We were talking about it, and he said one of the big issues is there's no electric cars that's second-hand on the market because they're not in fleets. How do you get through to the fleet buyers? Are they not buying it because it's not suitable for their sort of, the people working for their business, or do they not really understand how the cars have developed? How are we selling it or trying to sell these cars to fleets?
So I think there's a number of answers to that, and there may be some fleet owners, operators in here. But I think for me, talking to a lot of fleets and people looking at putting charging infrastructure in for fleets and providing solutions for fleet cars and EVs. Firstly, you've got a legacy of fleet managers, and the separation within businesses up to now has been energy managers who look after energy policy within a corporate, and fleet managers who look after the fleets. And we've now got to move to a position where energy is absolutely crucial, and the EV fleet that they're going to be getting is going to be as much about managing the energy for that corporate as it is about the transportation. So those two entities, persons, have to move together, and it needs to be seen as a whole solution for the electricity supplies for that corporate, for that facility. I also think from the fleet side, there's a real concern at the moment that just the numbers of cars are not out there that they can actually get.
Simon, we've got a question from the floor now, so I'll give this for you one. What is smart about smart charging?
The smart thing about smart charging is that you manage charging on two dimensions, one of which is that you manage charging to deal with when there is enough electricity around to make the cost of that electricity low. So, in other words, if you've got plenty of output from renewables, you charge. If you're actually short of output from renewables, you don't charge. The other dimension of smart charging is that you control charging to manage the capacity on the local network to which the charger is connected. So if that network is running at capacity, maybe because other vehicles are charging or because there's other sources of demand, you don't charge. If there is headroom on the network, you do charge. So what that needs is a sophisticated data set that allows you to manage both those dimensions, and signals being sent that allow that charging to take place. But most importantly, a consumer who says, I'm prepared to tolerate that my vehicle might not be charged when I want it.
There's another good question which we'll come on to in a bit. Where is all the energy going to come from? Which is the thing we'll come to in about 5 minutes or so. David, let's talk about the sort of the problem that we've got potentially coming down the line, which is the incompatibility. It's kind of been mentioned already. When you go out and buy a new Apple computer, it doesn't have a USB port on it, and the charger's a different shape. And if Apple aren't even making their own computers compatible, it's just not realistic to think that you're going to have chargers that are compatible, is it? So there is going to be this really messy crossover period, isn't there?
There has to be uniform charging in terms of connection, because if a user can't reliably see where the charging points are going to be, know that they can use them, and also know there's going to be availability when they get there, that will deter the uptake of EVs. And it's particularly important for EVs considered as a main car. Second car EV purchase is all predicated about charging around the home, or home charging. When you get to use the main car, you're really then dependent upon charging in the public space, connecting with your parking services, and also charging at motorway service areas on the strategic road network for doing longer journeys.
Stephanie, I think this is a really key point. Again, I get a lot of emails about this. A lot of people live in Victorian terrace houses. You know, there was one guy on our road who had an electric car, and we all had to leave a space outside his home so he could get the wire over. Again, it's a bit insurmountable, isn't it, to get people to buy a car if they've got to charge it at home?
So I think there's kind of certainly issues around people who don't have off-street parking. And I think, you know, some of the stats around this is around 25% of cars don't have kind of off-street parking overnight. What we're doing from central government is a number of things to try and help people to be able to access residential charging where they don't have off-street parking. That includes a £4.5 million grant scheme, the on-street residential charge point scheme, which allows kind of the trial of innovative methods of on-street charging, so including lamppost charging. There's actually some pop-up charge points being installed in Oxford at the moment, and other forms of charging. So for instance, think about things like rapid hubs as well, or parking in car parks as well. But we recognise there is a technology need that isn't yet being met by the market in all areas. So we're running a R&D competition at the moment, a £40 million R&D competition looking at, you know, other technological ways of meeting the demand. So there's a company, for instance, that goes around and charges your car using a mobile battery, for example. So we recognise there's an issue. We're putting money to help address it. But, you know, actually, when you look at the stats, people without off-street parking, a lot of people, you know, 95% of journeys in the UK are less than 50 miles. People have workplace charging, public reliance on the public network at the moment. You know, EV drivers that are out there who do not have off-street parking manage absolutely fine. So I think it's worth bearing that in mind as well.
Do you think people are going to have to change their mindset a bit and just plan ahead a bit more rather than just wait for electricity to be as convenient as going to a petrol station?
I think EV drivers today tell us it's way more convenient than having a petrol diesel car because, you know, you never have to visit a fuel station. You can just turn up at home, plug your car in, and then wake up the next morning and it's full. So I think there is a mindset shift, and I think actually lots of people would say that mindset shift is a positive one. You can, you know, charge your car for much cheaper than you can at the moment for petrol or diesel. You're able to do it at home and workplaces, so in kind of locations, any location that has electricity, which is clearly much more convenient than visiting a fuel station.
Okay, Ross, let's deal with the big one then. Where is all the energy going to come from? Can you give us an overview of like just how big a problem we've got coming down the line if everyone goes out and buys electric cars?
Well, actually, probably... Is this on? Yeah, it's actually probably not as big a problem as people think, because actually there is the potential to generate that electricity, and the system can take quite a lot of extra electricity if, and it's a massive if, we roll out all of these smart systems that we've been talking about. The electricity clearly has got to come from renewable energy. It's absolutely daft to think otherwise. I think there was another question down there about saying, aren't we just transferring the emissions to power plants? Well, it's just going to be unconscionable, isn't it, to have a load of electric vehicles on the road and then getting that from brown power. That would be completely daft. So anyone sensible looking at that has got to say it's got to come from renewable energy. And that's where I was mentioning there's a mismatch here with government policy, because yes, we have incentivised and are building out some large offshore wind farms, but the policy from government at the moment is that it's got enough renewables coming on to meet its generation challenge and its carbon targets for the next few years, but it's not looked beyond that, and at some stage it's going to have to, and it's going to have to, I'm afraid, open up some more onshore renewables. The other thing about charging for EVs is we have this ludicrous dilemma at the moment where we want to encourage fleets and businesses and companies to invest in electric vehicles, but the planning policy and the policy on energy is very much to restrict on-site renewables and not incentivise them. So the idea of a company coming along and saying, I want to put two turbines up in near my fleet centre to power my vehicles, well, those two turbines would be very difficult at the moment to get through planning because of an obsession about stopping wind turbines in particularly in England. This has got to stop. We need more renewable generation, and we will need it into the future.
David, who's going to drive all this? Because we keep talking about the government does this and private companies do this. Has it got to come from the government with sort of big structuring of energy policy and incentivising? Is there some kind of Elon Musk character going to come along and completely change everything? Who drives it?
Well, my personal view is it would be very dangerous and short-sighted to wait for one person or one part of industry to be the person we're all waiting on before it can kick off. That sounds a little bit sort of excuse-like. In actual fact, I think the sentiments expressed here is that there's lots of different parts of industry that are going to come together, government as well, to do their bit. And when all of those things come together, the intention should be that the consumer, the person that's about to make a purchase decision for a new car, will say, the car fits my needs, the price point is right, driven by incentives, the public charging infrastructure meets my main car requirements, I'll happily go and buy one. Until all those things are in place from OEMs, dealer networks, energy suppliers, home builders, government, local authorities doing parking with integrated charging, until all those things are, not say in place, but being addressed, I don't think many consumers are going to sign up and go, right, £30,000 on an EV, thanks very much.
Ross, I think it was you, I remember writing about, will supply meet demand effectively? Are the car companies a bit behind the curve in providing enough cars?
Yeah, we're told the waiting list for EVs is just growing and growing at the moment, and I think that certainly when you talk to some of the fleets, that's a concern they have. I was talking to a major supplier of vehicles to fleets, and they said they can't source enough electric vehicles, and the waiting lists are getting longer and longer. So it sounds like that is an issue at the moment. Hopefully it's a short-term issue, but it is an issue.
Simon, you talked about hydrogen, and obviously the infrastructure is way behind the electricity infrastructure, but I have heard people suggest that even electric vehicles will be a short stop, and eventually things will move on to hydrogen. What's your take on hydrogen as a future fuel? Do you think that electricity is just sort of there in the interim and we'll move on to hydrogen, or do we just not know? Do we need much more investment in hydrogen? Where do you think it's going?
I think it's unwise to make a firm prediction about any of this, but my gut feeling is that electricity has a sufficient lead now to be predominant for the applications to which it's well suited. The areas where it isn't well suited at the moment seem to be mostly around long-haul heavy goods, and there are bigger questions as well around marine, which we probably won't go into here. But so I can foresee hydrogen application for long-haul heavy goods. Hydrogen is tricky stuff. It's expensive to make, it's expensive to store, and handling it has some quite significant issues. So it's not an easy thing, hydrogen. So I think hydrogen may find a place, and what might drive that is if heat policy starts to move quite heavily towards hydrogen. Because if we end up, frankly, I think at the moment, everyone's scratching their heads on heat. As you saw from the energy diagram, heat is large. At the moment, we have a really good system for delivering heat called the gas system. And the gas system has the huge advantage of inbuilt storage. And to give you a feel for scale, when the Beast from the East blew in, the gas system supplied over 200 gigawatts. The electricity system did just over 50 gigawatts. The gas system ramped at 116 gigawatts over 3 hours, and the electricity system did 16 over the same time period. So the gas system is an amazingly large and flexible asset, meeting a massive need. So we don't really have a good answer yet as to what's going to replace it. District heating is one possibility. We've got water networks going all over the place. Another is electric, which is, I think, something the government is has hung its hat on a bit at the moment. And hydrogen is possibly the third option. And hydrogen's being looked at now quite intensively. If hydrogen does end up playing a big part in the answer, it will then be necessary to build a hydrogen infrastructure. If we build a hydrogen infrastructure, hydrogen for transport becomes at the margin of that and starts to look a lot more interesting, I think.
Are there potential benefits to hydrogen cars over electric cars? Do we not really know yet?
Well, if we fix the range on electric cars, which it looks like we are doing, then the classic benefit goes away because it was range. Hydrogen cars are relatively conventional. There's a lot more conventional parts, suits existing manufacturing plants better, that kind of stuff. I think in the end it will come down to a financial equation, which I think most probably electricity has already set itself up to win for personal transport.
It's definitely, you have to set time scales because it gives everyone something to aim at. But how reliable are time scales when you sort of say we want this by this stage and this by this year, and everyone's going to be driving around in electric cars by this year? How reliable can they actually be?
So I think as a number of the presentations set out, there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment. I think for me, the biggest uncertainty is what the future of mobility looks like. So if you retain the current, individual car ownership, cars parked for 95% of the time, that doesn't feel likely to me when you look out on the timescales of 2030 to 2040, 2050. But I think the key thing from a government perspective is that we do have a regulatory regime that looks at new car and van CO2 levels, so at a European level and as well. So whatever the future of mobility, we need those cars to be zero emission is kind of the certainty that we can certainly provide. And the trajectory that I set out in my presentation gives one indicative pathway that we think delivers what we need it to from an environmental perspective. But if it goes quicker, great from our perspective. And I think what we're doing as a government more broadly is trying to take steps to facilitate mobility as a service and different ways of, people moving in the country, because actually when you look at that macro approach, there are significant emission savings also from people using things like car sharing schemes, more efficient use of public transport and the integration of public transport with things like Uber and other mobility service providers. So yeah, I think there is a lot of uncertainty, but what isn't uncertain, I think, is that those vehicles will need to be zero emission.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for such a stimulating discussion. We'll be back at 2 o'clock for, you thought electric vehicles were hard to predict. We're doing autonomous cars at 2 o'clock, so we'll see what happens with that. But thank you very much. It's really, really interesting. Please thank our panel.